You are listening to the Labor Forum here on Monday, May 26th. Is that the right day? I'm on the right day.
Yes, it is.
Good. Monday, May 26th here in Atlanta. You are, as I said, you're listening to WRFG 89.3 FM. My name's Dianne Mathiowetz, and this is the Labor Forum. Always starts off with that song. That's how you know that you're about to get some news about the workers and the work that we all do that keeps society running. I'm joined in the studio by Kenyon Beasley. He's with the American Postal Workers Union. Hi, Kenyon.
Hey, how's it going, Diane?
And we've got Paul McLennan here. He is retired with the ATU. He was a MARTA mechanic. Hi, Paul.
Hey.
So for those of you who maybe are tuning in for the first time, you are maybe listening on your radio. You could be listening on your computer at wrfg.org. You might be one of the people who's listening on a mobile device through the app that WRFG has. And if you're really a lucky person, you are watching us live as we have our own YouTube channel. It's called the Labor Forum WRFG YouTube channel. And then you get a chance to see what the guests look like and about what a good time we're having in the studio as we talk with our activist workers and learn about the issues. So we started this new segment now that we're an hour long, 4 to 5 on Mondays, where we want to start the program off each Monday with a glimpse, a look at something, someone, some event that really had an impact on the workers' movements for justice and their rights. And so Paul has brought us a really informative piece now about a UAW member, as am I. His name is General Baker, and we're going to hear about General Baker.
Okay. Labor and human rights advocate General Baker passed away a little more than a week ago on May 18th. General Baker had been at the center of many of the struggles for social change and economic justice in Detroit since the 1960s. Through his positions as a labor leader, an economic theorist, a political candidate, and newspaper editor, Baker fought to improve the lives of African Americans by consistently protesting against the system responsible for their oppression. He was born on September 1st, 1941, soon after his parents moved to Detroit from Georgia so that his father could work in the automobile industry. During the early 1960s, Baker attended Wayne State University, where he became involved in black nationalism and left-wing politics. He studied the writings of Karl Marx and developed an ideology that combined the beliefs of socialism with black nationalism. In 1964, Baker went to work at the Dodge main plant in Hamtramck. In 1965, he was drafted into the Army, but refused to be sworn in as a protest to the Vietnam War. General Baker was the first American to refuse the Vietnam draft. His case was a landmark in draft resistance, symbolizing the beginning of the anti-war movement. He expected to be tried and put in jail, but was declared a security risk and released. During the 1960s, workers at the Dodge main plant faced a speed-up on the production line that made their jobs increasingly difficult and dangerous. Workers found the union officials unresponsive to their complaints, particularly the complaints of African Americans. Baker and some of his fellow workers began to organize African American workers to fight for their rights. In the aftermath of the 1967 uprising, African Americans across the city intensified their struggle for their rights. Baker and other leaders increased their criticism of Dodge and the United Auto Workers Union, and on May 2nd, 1968, led workers out on what would be the first of many wildcat strikes, called without the sanction of union leadership. Baker was fired from his job and blacklisted from employment in the auto industry after being identified as one of the leaders of the strike. Baker and the other leaders of the protest movement at the Dodge main plant created the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement, DRUM. DRUM's goal was to end all discriminatory union and employer policies and to increase the power of African American workers in American society. They demanded that African Americans be hired as shop foremen, union officials, and as UAW president. Baker served as managing editor of the movement's newspaper, the Inner City Voice. DRUM spurred African Americans in other plants and industries to form their own revolutionary union movement. The ideas emanating from that period inspired black auto workers throughout America. Baker and others then founded the League of Revolutionary Black Workers as an organization to combine the actions of the various union movements. The League eventually split apart due to differing interpretations of its purpose and tactics, but Baker continued to fight for economic justice. In 1976, he ran for Michigan House and ran again in 1978. The United Auto Workers issued a statement on behalf of the members and retirees of the UAW on the passing of General Baker. It is with deep regret and sadness that we mourn the passing of labor leader, educator, and historian General Baker. General's commitment and efforts in the labor movement, spanning a half-century, are too numerous to list, but we are grateful for his leadership and commitment to improving the lives of working people. General Baker's effort was always to build unity among different sectors of workers, regardless of race or gender, around their common class interests. General Baker remained one of the few leaders from the 60s who continued the struggle for a whole new cooperative world. He believed in the necessity of building a national movement to take over the giant corporations before they take over the people.
So rest in power, General Baker. I had the chance to, I don't know, meet is probably too kind or too broad a word. I got a chance to hear him speak at the Social Forum in Detroit. And he's been on WRFG several times over the last several years. In fact, I think he was on just a month or so ago on Heather Gray's show, Just Peace. You know, I got hired into GM at 76, and the impact of what the black workers, in particular in Detroit, even though it was Dodge and not GM, was still something that was really very well felt, in the sense of here in Atlanta, at Lakewood, for example, when I first started, like I said, in January of 1976, you still could see where the signs had been for the bathrooms and the water fountains. They were gone, but you could still tell the outline of the words. And it still was very evident, even though I would say that I think there were certainly people in the leadership of UAW Local 34, because we had wildcat strikes too, who understood how important it was for something not just always to go through a grievance procedure. I mean, sometimes that wasn't the way to go. Nevertheless, there was just such stark, still, power relationships between the majority white workforce, majority white male workforce, and then those relatively few black and women workers who were there. So I can imagine in 76, I know how it was for me as one of the few women in the plant. I can imagine how incredibly repressive and oppressive, because everybody who works in an auto plant is facing the same heat, the same speed up, the same bosses. Yeah. So I really appreciate what Drum and Baker in particular did for the UAW, and I think for all workers. So I don't know whether we want to, I think what we'll go ahead and do is we wanted to have this particular tribute to General Baker because the topic on today's program is really about the centrality of the role of African American workers in leading worker movements. And we had actually come up with this topic before General Baker died, but it was important that we felt that we wanted to start the program off by talking about a very clear example of how black workers, any workers who are suffering more extreme oppression on the job, by moving forward on fighting back against that oppression, really elevate the whole struggle and bring all kinds of other issues into the worker movement. And so I guess we'll just go ahead and segue then. Well, and you wanted to come up?
Yeah, I do have one question. I was just wondering, outside of the oppressive conditions within the
Dodge, Maine.
Okay, mainly Dodge, Maine?
Well, Dodge, Maine was one of the worst. I mean, every auto plant, probably every worker in every auto plant probably thinks theirs is the worst. But Dodge, Maine really did have a horrible history.
Okay, well, one thing, didn't it spread to like different plants all around the city of Detroit, and then how Drum really came together as far as trying to, I guess, coordinate the efforts of all the other plants.
Right, it did spread, and that was the reason why they had to form this organization that brought all the different pieces together.
And it was actually beyond auto. It went to other plants as well. I think it really was kind of the genesis of the idea of black caucuses,
okay.
You know, and workers within, regardless of the union, regardless of the workplace, essentially getting together, finding out what their common grievances were, trying to figure out how to move against it, how to, you know, alter the power relationship.
Okay.
Yeah, so the League of Revolutionary Black Workers got a reputation that emanated from Detroit,
right.
and spread out.
Wow. Wow. Were there any other influences outside of, we do know that present conditions can, you know, prompt someone to move in a positive direction. But I was wondering, were there any incidents within their early life, any, I don't know, I guess normally, I like to think that there's some situation that occurs in a person's early life that prompts them to go in a certain direction. I was just wondering.
Well, I do know that I read that he, after graduating from high school, there was a recession at the time, so he was out of work for quite a while. And I think going to Wayne State University is probably where a lot of his political education came from. So I'm guessing there were professors there and a lot of people, and I'm sure he was influenced by a lot of the people around him.
Yeah, but do you remember that, you know, King actually delivered his I Have a Dream speech in Detroit the year before. Almost the exact same speech.
Is that right?
Yeah. The Detroit movement was huge, both from civil rights, black liberation movements. I mean, it was such a center of so many, literally tens and tens of thousands of workers whose families might have had roots in the South, who escaped Jim Crow through a variety of needs, actually sometimes running from the Klan literally on their heels, to the poverty and other things. And so Detroit in the late 50s, early 60s, up and through this period with Drum was, I don't know, sorry, it was the breeding ground is not the right word. It was the spark, it was the inspiration for just really lots of things. Yeah, they had a march. King delivered this speech. I want to say it was tens of thousands of people marched in Detroit.
Wow. And
the year before, the 62.
And that was tied into labor when he gave this speech, or was it just surrounding all the different actions that were going on?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I'm guessing, again, because I think the connection, and I think the point we're going to make a little later, is the connection between black workers in the community. So I mean, this situation that it isn't just the conditions on your job, it's that there's no transportation in your neighborhood, and the housing stock is dilapidated, or you don't have street lights, or there's police brutality. I mean, all that kind of plays into, then you go on the job and it's hot and you've got a racist boss, and so it just kind of all comes together.
Yeah.
And so it really was a much bigger grassroots movement in Detroit. And then, again, this is part of this incredible history of the leadership of workers in struggles that we don't really know much about.
Right. I wasn't familiar with the story. Paul, he put it out there, and I was wild. Like, wow, really, I was surprised that I'd never heard anything. But we are in Georgia, and interestingly enough, from my understanding, Mr. Baker was from Georgia. You know, he moved here.
His family was.
Okay.
And I think that period of time, there was a lot of migrating to the north for jobs.
Right.
And this would have been right before the war.
Right. Wow.
Thanks again, Paul. You really added a lot to each one of the programs with this
Surely does.
that you're bringing us. And I want to say, both Kenyon and I are, we're active in the labor movement, and yet you're still bringing us stuff that we don't know about, and that's a good thing, because we're bringing you information here on the Labor Forum. That, as we always say, this is the station where you're going to find out things that you're not ever going to hear on corporate media or the newspapers, and you certainly didn't learn about it in school, about General Baker and the drum movement. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thank you.
All right, so we invited Greg in particular because the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists is, I believe, has been in existence since 1972.
72.
And Greg, as has been mentioned, is the local Metro Atlanta chapter president. And it really kind of just comes out again what the history of the CBTU was. They had their national convention here from Wednesday until today. And this is sort of another example of what we're talking about coming out of what we talked about with General Baker. And that is the development, the formation and development of organizations that very specifically are addressing the issue of black workers. So Greg, if you wouldn't mind giving our audience just a little bit of a background of
A history of CBTU. I'll be glad to. Well, CBTU was founded in 1972, and it was founded by 5 black trade unions who were actually presidents and vice presidents of their local respective. The only person that held a national office was Bill Lucy, who was Secretary Treasurer of ASME, American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees. And CBTU came together because, one, the black trade unions felt, for lack of a better word, they felt dissed by the National AFL-CIO during the Nixon and McGovern's race. Mr. Meany, who was the president of the AFL-CIO at that time, Jordan Meany, he and the AFL decided that they would stay out of the presidential race, and much to the dissatisfaction of the black trade unions who wanted them to get involved in the McGovern-Nixon race. Blacks felt that Nixon was not good for the labor movement, not good for the black community overall, and the white leaders of the AFL-CIO felt that they were just going to stay neutral in the race. Well, Mr. Lucy and 4 others got together, called for a convention in Chicago to establish the CBTU that would deal with black trade unions issues. They did not want to kick the establishment, but they also wanted their voice to be heard by the leaders in the AFL-CIO, because there were many blacks who were part of the AFCO. They did not hold, again, national offices like Mr. Lucy did, but they were local presidents, they were local vice presidents, and they had large black membership. And the blacks wanted to have a voice and a say in who was going to be elected president at that time, and they felt that their voice wasn't heard. So they came together to form this organization to deal with political, economic, and issues around education and the disadvantaged. So that's how CBTU came together, and we're happy that they came back to Atlanta, the home or the birthplace of Dr. Martin Luther King.
All right, so let me just ask, I mean, I've known people in CBTU for many years, and my, let's see, what do I say? My experience generally is that the members of CBTU are some of the most progressive, most articulate, most active members in their unions, and that they consistently, it isn't just a matter, as Paul described, General Baker. The point is if you've got racism and sexism flourishing in your union, and your union leadership does not address it, then you do not have a strong union. And so,
absolutely. I mean, I think, and that problem still persists. I mean, it hadn't gone away. Because if you look at the numbers of blacks that are part of local unions across this country, the number is astronomical as we look at them. And those that we do now have blacks that are now holding real national office, such as our international president, Lee Saunders, who was elected to be the international president of one of the largest public sector unions in the country. But we've not made nearly enough strides in terms of blacks in the labor movement, in terms of the challenges that we face as workers in the workplace. We want to bring that to the forefront, and we're encouraging people, urging people to become a part of certainly CBTU, because we don't only have black members in our organization, we have whites, we have Hispanics, we have all kinds of people, because it's really for the disadvantaged. And to speak to the issues of the disadvantage. And if you would, Dianne, I'd like to just kind of talk about the excitement of the convention a little bit. One of the key things, Vincent Ford came down, to talk to Senator Boy. Everybody knows how Senator Boy is. He came down along with Virginia Turner, who's the president of Georgia LT, and the issue of reclaiming the promise was one of the things that the CBTU convention took on in terms of public school versus private schools, charter schools. That's a major issue around this country. New Mexico and Philadelphia has taken it on and have gotten the community, as you talked about earlier, have gotten the community involved in it. And they've been to run their governor out of the state of Philadelphia because of what he's done with this charter school versus public school. And people understanding that when you send kids to charter school, the money, if the kids can't make it to charter school, the money leaves and doesn't come back to the public school system. That's a major problem. That's a major problem. So CBTU is partnering with the GFT to talk about that and what we can do in pushing a national push across this country. As I said, New Mexico and Philadelphia got a great movement going on, and we wanted to get the same thing here in Atlanta and across the region and across the country. That's one of the things that we talked about. And the other thing that was exciting, we talked about, you know, this whole concept of unemployment for blacks. It was a resolution, Terence, that was passed and dealt with unemployment for blacks. Since 2008, we had a recession. The stock market came back up. Wall Street is doing good. But when we look at unemployment for black, it is still higher than it is for whites in this country. Why is it?
And for black youth.
Yeah, astronomical. Absolutely. So we're asking ourselves, why is it, and what can we do, and what would be the move? And CBTU has passed a resolution that we're going to move forward and let our voices be heard around this issue of unemployment for black workers, Latino workers, and all those workers in this country who are not getting their share of the piece of the pie. Now, I'm going to say this, and I'll be through after this, because then you can ask me any question you want to have. I feel honored to be here, but one of the things that we really understand, I know you've done a lot about this minimum wage thing with this program. It is so important that people understand that Georgia, with its $5.15 minimum wage, the lowest minimum wage, I guess, in the country, that people need to understand that we need to work on this minimum wage because we need to raise it up, because it's our people who are not getting paid like they ought to get paid, and the 1% is getting richer and everybody else is getting poor. No more middle class, no more middle class. I talked to a black preacher. I was sitting at a forum, and this black preacher was sitting at the table with a bunch of black preachers, just all black preachers, and a few Jamaicans and people from the Caribbean, the island was there. And he said to me, he said, Greg, why is it that you guys want to raise the minimum wage? I want you to hear this, Terence. I want you to hear this. I want you to hear this. You got to listen to this. Yeah. He said, why is it that y'all want to raise the minimum wage? And when you raise the minimum wage, it's going to compress the middle class. I said, have you lost your mind? What middle class? You driving a regular Mercedes and you think you're in the middle class? Come on, there is no middle class. There's the 1% and there's the poor. So we must raise the tide of the unemployed, for the minimum wage for those who are making less than $10.10 or $15 an hour. We must raise those minimum wage. So CBTU, we're on it. We're committed to it, and we're looking for others to get on board with us in this because it's going to help our community as a whole. Abandoned houses, people, children, problems, and all this stuff, people working 2 and 3 jobs, they can't take care of their children. They're trying to work. They're trying to make a living, and they ain't making no money. So with that being said, I yield now. So any question you got for me, don't give me a mic because I'm gone.
No. I do have one question. I'd like to go back to the story you were telling about sitting around with the preachers. I'm trying to understand, what was the rationale behind not raising the middle? I don't understand you're shrinking the middle class. I didn't get that.
I didn't either. Oh, okay. I mean, that's why I said to him, and I was at the table with others, and a young lady who is, she makes a good salary. She works in DeKalb County. She said that I won't call her name. I won't put that on the air, but she attacked him, and she said, listen, the Lord has blessed me, I make good money, but I certainly want to see the people under me make decent monies too. I don't think it's right that they do. Another lady hollered out, he's a Republican, he's a Republican. I said, I don't care what he is. He's driving a ragged Mercedes, and he thinks he's middle class. Just because you drive a Mercedes does not make you middle class.
So when we come back from a short break, we're going to hear a little promotional message from WRFG. We're going to add the voice of Terence Courtney with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration into this conversation, and we will move a little beyond just what the CBTU did, but to this more general topic of the absolute necessity. It isn't just it'd be good.
It's a necessity.
This is a necessity for those most oppressed, most exploited on these jobs to be the leadership, because they are the ones who can both explain it, and they are the ones who are going to be most passionate about fighting for it. And so we want to get back to that conversation right after this brief message from WRFG. Please. We're back, and the engineer Chris here has improved what I said. The speech that Dr. King gave and the march that took place in Detroit was not a year before, it was just a couple of months before. It was in June of 1963, and then he gave that famous speech in DC just a couple months later. All right, now we're adding Terence Courtney. Many of you have heard Terence on other programs here on WRFG. He oftentimes does a report, particularly about the situation of black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean and other parts of the diaspora here to the United States. As I said, he is a staff person with the what's called BAJI, Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And we want to add Terence in this because he is a longtime labor activist here in the city, has played a particular role as well with the whole crisis of public sector workers. And so we think he's going to be a great participant in this. I'm going to give you first up, Terence. If you want to just start any place in this conversation, go right ahead.
Well, first I want to thank Dianne and some of my colleagues here on the panel, Paul, Greg, and my new friend Kenyon. This is a great conversation because anytime we get a chance to really understand more deeply the role that black workers play in the United States economy and the economy of the world, I think that's an opportunity to understand more deeply how power works, yes, and how wealth is created and how eventually oppression must be dismantled, right? And the way I'd like to approach this conversation is, first I'll just reintroduce myself for the sake of folks who don't know me or who've heard of me on the air before. But again, my name is Terence Courtney. I'm a native Atlantan. I've been an organizer nearly 20 years inside and outside the labor movement. And the work that I'm currently doing now is still related. What I'm effectively trying to do is bring together Black Americans and Black immigrants to fight for economic justice and human rights and social justice and basically racial equity. But to achieve that very big goal, we have to understand some of the things that are operating against us, right? So what I want to try to do is kind of tie together some of the comments in the history that was provided by Paul, the comments made by both of you. And I believe to really understand the central role that Black workers have played in progressive movements, we really have to understand two things. One is history, right? So we have to know our history.
Always.
We have to know that Black work, either slave labor or wage labor, was central to the growth and development of national and global capitalism, right? And that all wealth in the world today, that we see in advanced countries like United States, Britain, France, Europe, the so-called global north, is derived from the exploitation of Black workers and our land and resources. So we understand that all the prosperity and power that we see around us today is really derived from 500 years of exploiting our work in all kinds of areas, in the farms, in factories, as domestic workers, as all kinds of workers, healthcare workers and so on, public sector employees, employees with the United States Postal Service. Moreover, what we're saying is this accumulated wealth was taken from us. It was robbed from us because we weren't brought here by our own volition. We didn't slave for 400 years, sun up and sun down for free because we wanted to. We didn't endure the exploitation of Jim Crow because we wanted to. And even today, as we see folks fighting to increase the minimum wage and to have better working conditions, we understand the struggle continue to realize full democracy in the workplace and in the community, right? So that's why we have to understand that the U.S. and global economy needs Black labor. And so that helps us understand the history. Now we got to know the now, as you mentioned. People out there are fighting for just basic increases in their life, right? We see workers, Black employees have the highest rate of participation in the U.S. economy, but ironically, as you said, face the highest rate of unemployment, the lowest wages, right? We also see that all this wealth created is really being shifted away from our communities through public policy that cut social spending, housing, food, healthcare, transportation. All these extractions of wealth in our community are going not to us, but to rich elites at the top, the proverbial 1%, right? So we have to understand that, but we also have to understand that this process is a racist process. In other words, who sit at the very top? You got mostly rich white men, but we also have Black conservatives. And I think that really answers the question, why would a Black person oppose raising the minimum wage? Because some Black people don't want to dismantle oppression. They simply want access to it.
You're part of it.
They want to be Black capitalists so that they too can exploit other Black people for wealth. So we have to understand, in terms of social movements that will advance a progressive way of thinking, that we have to look at this both as a racial problem and a class problem. And I would even add as a gendered problem, because Black women, especially if you're a foreign-born Black woman, say from Haiti, you sit at the very bottom of the United States wage scale, right? So these are some of the things we have to understand the central role. And I can, if you want, and I'll answer questions, but I think we can also talk about, you know, some of the ways that we've resisted in the past, right? Examples of our leadership in progressive movements.
Thanks so much for that opening comment. I think it really takes us to where we really want to go, in the sense of, we started off with a discussion about General Baker, who really, in a period of time in which we could say that the union movement was not responding well, that's an understatement, not responding well, both to the general conditions of oppression in the plant, and in particular, how it is manifested out in the communities. I think there's sometimes maybe I'll ask this question to you all. This idea that unions are about wages and working conditions. And I think what black workers in general, and I think women and other people who are marginalized, bring to the union movement is that workers live in communities. And when it affects their community, whether it's education, health care, transportation, clean air, water, etc., that is an issue that they want their union to take up as well. And so I'll just throw that out.
Look, let me just say something, Dianne. I think Terence hit on the best of all when you talk about public policy. And when we talk about where we are in terms of, for blacks in this country, organized labor has been probably the best thing in terms of moving, getting anything done, and being a part of the union, really. It is, but we want our piece of the pie. We don't want to just say we in it and we don't have a voice in it. And we paying dues and our money is going toward this. We want to have a voice in it. We're going to have a voice in it. Now that's a fact. But I think that when we talk about this, we have to, and that was the issue with them with CBTU is that they want to be a part of who is going to be in the seat of making good public policy. Because good public policy going to take care of everything in terms of the community, in terms of jobs, in terms of everything. But all politics is local. It's very much local. As we all around this table know, it is very much local. But we don't engage in the political process enough to bring about those kinds of changes that Terence kind of outlined in terms of blacks. We do not. We vote in people because we know their name. We don't know their politics. We don't know what they're good for in terms of what it is affect our issues. And I think that's the educational part. I work with voter empowerment collaboratives, and we're doing that through voter education, voter empowerment, and teaching people what the issues are. When it comes time for election, first thing you know, people run around and say, vote for me, but we have to educate people on the issues all along. That's what, and what you're talking about now is the issues. And we're educating today around those issues. And we have to do that on an ongoing, every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week basis. Because it can't just happen when it's time for election.
Well, let me just ask a question. I think one of the things that General Baker's life showed is that there's lots of forms of resistance. And I want to ask people to comment on that as well. Because I think what I got out of what Terence was saying at the beginning was that the system, whether it's voting or whatever, oftentimes doesn't work for us.
It's not designed. But if I could, I would like to say this. Everything, well, first of all, unions are in a unique position in order to make things happen. When you do talk about civil rights movement, everything emanates from people having a collective experience of being marginalized. Civil rights took major influence from what was going on within labor at that time. When you talk about the beginning of the 20th century, there are different forms, and we want to engage or participate in each and every form that is possible. When you do talk about transportation, clean air, clean water, jobs, which, you know, for me is major. It's all about incorporating everything, and that's what I did see with General Baker. I mean, it wasn't just one particular issue, even though it was concentrated on what was going on in the plants. But a lot of that, how can I say, organizing was done around other issues that were occurring in the city of Detroit. And as a matter of fact, it created a political base in that city. That they're going through their problems right now, but if you look at that city, you still got people who are in the political, how would you say, forum in the city that actually come out of what was going on when General Baker was organizing. So,
Well, and I think what you both are describing, on one hand, I think with your comment, I'm sorry, Kenyon, is you know, the kind of long history of social movements and social resistance that is the tradition of Africans in the Americas, right? And that's what I call myself, an African in the Americas. We were brought here as people to work, right? So when you think about our experience in the United States, is really centered on labor, right? White people didn't bring us here in the 1500s just because they hated black people. They needed workers. They needed free labor.
Yeah.
And they'd already killed all the indigenous.
And that free labor laid the foundation for modern capitalism, because it laid the foundation for the Industrial Revolution that created all the stuff we see around us today, right? But even during that time, black people resisted in small ways and in large ways. Even on the jobs, they did work slowdowns. You know, they pretended to be incompetent at their duties, right? And in large ways, we were very important into global struggles. When you think about the global struggle against the enslavement of labor, you know, we have to look around the world. Haiti in 1791 was the first black republic, the first successful slave revolution that threw off the shackles of economic exploitation, right? And that reverberated around the world. Then you had black people like Tubman, Douglas, Sojourner Truth, who were in the forefront of the abolitionist movement, right? To free black people from slave labor, from forced free labor, right? Then when you think of the labor movement in the 1930s, you had people like Claudia Jones, Paul Robeson, C.L.R. James, black luminaries who articulated an understanding of how capitalism has to exploit, and in particular stigmatize classes like us to produce high rates of profit and growth, right? So we see all these different examples, and even we go into the 50s and 60s with the Black Liberation Movement, which was global, right? In Africa, at the same time, you had Europe that was exploiting workers on the continent, and so black people and workers rose up in all over Africa, right, to resist this. And we see this in Latin America, right? You know, black workers in Cuba and in South America fought against exploitation. So black people, you know, wherever you find significant social movements that are transforming our world fundamentally, black people are usually at the forefront.
Because they're the most oppressed.
Well,
I mean, they're the most oppressed in terms of, going back to your opening statement, in terms of, we didn't come over here on our own. We came over here to work. And we're still working, and we're still working for less. We're the last one hired and still the first one fired. I mean, so that whole movement is still there for us in terms of, and I think that it needs to be an understanding of those who have gone on to college and, you know, have their degrees and all like that, and now they can't get a job, a decent job. They got to be police officers or school teachers, and they don't want to be police officers, but they don't want to be school teachers, but they got a degree, and they need a job that's paying decent wages, so they go into that field now. You know, I mean, that's why we get some of the things that we get, because we have people doing jobs that don't really want to do those jobs for the money.
And I want to go back to your statement about unemployment, because we have to realize that high rates of unemployment in the black community is not an accident.
No, it's not.
Capitalism requires high rates of unemployment in order to drive wages and working conditions down, right? And that produces more profit. So the fact that our communities are in this continual state of unemployment is not some anomaly. The system is not broken.
It's designed to be this way.
It's designed to be this way. So with that fundamental understanding, we need to realize that as we struggle for improvements, we have to realize that one day we have to do better than what we have, right? We have to actually make new, more, I guess you could say, cooperative economies that are based more on cooperation than competition, more on sharing than selfishness.
Well, what America you live in gonna move to? I just want to know America you gonna move to.
Well, I'm saying we got to do what we've been doing, and that's building social movements that transform America and the world, right? Because we can't settle for what we have now. If we had done that, we'd still be slaves.
Well, I agree with you, and I'm in the fight with you. But I'm just saying is that, but we have to continue to, and I'm gonna let you get in, Kenyon. We have to continue to educate and educate and educate, and we educate in terms of large groups, smaller groups to educate and create larger groups. Because I think the gentleman we talked about earlier, he didn't start with a large group. He started off with a small group. CBTU did not start with a large group, it started off with a small group. So, but we have to begin to find like-minded people to work together to move an agenda to get this done. And we got to stop this separatism, you know, the NACP, the SELC, the so-and-so, the so-and-so, the so-and-so. We have to come together collectively and say, we must change this. It's not right, and we have to make it right.
Well, what I like to say, every cloud has a silver lining. And even though it's a negative, when you do talk about black people, minorities, being the subject or object of pretty much exploitation, the beauty of it is you do get a chance to have conversations like this, and everything does start small with one person. And the thought of conversation, and that's exactly what's going on here. You put those conversations out there, and when you do talk about separate entities, SELC, NAACP, with those conversations come an identified goal. When we got that one identified goal, if everybody's working toward that goal, hey, you pretty much change the mindset across the world. When you say the system is not broken, it's done by design, how about it's just a broken design?
Could be a broken design if we break it.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I think one of the things that's been so clear over the last 20 or 30 years, and I'll add my own experience is when I started at GM, there were relatively few women workers and very, very few Latino workers, and very, you know, there was a sizable, but still a very small number of black workers. And when I left 30 years later, that had totally flip-flopped. Women were probably 35–40% of the workforce in a plant. Black workers were 50%, perhaps even more. There were Latino workers, there were Arab workers, there were openly lesbian and gay workers. In other words, the demographics of who's in the workplace has changed. And now when we've had many workers come in here from the fast food worker strikes and the low-wage workers, we can see that the leadership of what's happening right now, when we look across and see who's in motion, who's out there really challenging this system,
right.
We see that they are both young and older, and they are certainly not the same labor union leadership that many of us identify with. And lots of cities, including Atlanta, probably a lot of the leadership who've been elected are black women. I want all three of you to comment a little bit about how, in these last few minutes we've got of the program, how you see the fact that the faces of those who are the leaders now and their experiences as of how they came up through the jobs, how you see that can change the vitality, the outreach, the success of the growing workers' movement in this country. I'm going to start with you. And everybody really only has what? What does everybody have?
A minute.
A minute and a half. So be fast and succinct.
Wow, so incredibly complicated question. But I'll just answer that by saying, you know, from my, you know, my 20 years experience as an organizer out here in the trenches, and B, as a person who likes to study in order to learn how to do better and look at history. And I look at current events and the people, especially someone involved in trying to get black folks conscious about the immigrant rights movement, I really admire the work that are done by young women Latinas in the immigrant rights movement who've led struggles, who are now kind of leading the way in terms of democratizing the United States as it comes to immigrant rights. And that has an effect on labor because immigrants are such an integral part. Right. And so when we look at black immigrants, we see that, you know, they get the worst of all foreign-born workers, and often it's black women who lead the way. So when I look at that, I ask myself, what is this phenomenon, right? And black women in social movements have created theories about this and understanding, one of which is called intersectionality, that sees the connection between forms of oppression like capitalism and white supremacy and sexism, patriarchy. And that has informed the way we strategize, because once we understand that black women often are the leaders in social movements, Fannie Lou Hamer, Angela Davis, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, the list goes on, we start to see, wow, this helps our strategy. Because if we can make sure we get these most oppressed women at the core of what we're doing, that strengthens our movement, and that gives us more power. So for me, that's what I'm looking forward to, is how do we organize in an intersectional way that tears down all forms of oppression, right? And because we can't just dismantle economic oppression and leave up white supremacy and sexism, right? We can't do that. So we gotta take down this monster in one big swing.
You eat the elephant one bite at a time. I want to say that, because I'm probably older than you other two guys here, but I have been much moved and impressed by the leadership of black women moving into elected positions, because in my own city of East Point, we now have the majority of our council is black female. In the city of Fab, in the small city of Fab, and the majority of that council is black female. And as you go around the region, you will find that many black females are being elected into office. And one thing that I've learned, and having been a former elected official myself, is that women tend to think more methodical about things than men do if they can let their emotions go. And think about what the real issue is and how to resolve those issues. And I think that we're in for a ride with many of the ladies that have been elected, but all of them ain't good. I'm not going to say all of them good, because some of them hold on to that personal stuff and they need to let it go and just focus on what the issues are, the true issues are. So I think that, Dianne, to your question is, I support and applaud our black women who are elected. I think that they do a great job, many of them, but just like everything else, you're always going to have one bad apple in every bunch.
Kenyon, you get the last few seconds, I guess.
Okay.
So the question is,
go ahead.
to restate, this new development we see, both where low-wage workers are the leadership, they're the vital force, and then that of those low-wage workers, they come in all hues, ages, and what does that mean for the future?
Well, what I think it means for the future, I gotta add this in there. When it does come down to, how can I say, an ebb in the movements not being as prominent as they once were, I think it has everything to do with there being a generation gap. It hadn't transferred to the, I'm getting ready, I'm speeding it up. It hadn't transferred to the younger workers as quickly and as effectively as we'd like to think it has. But what I see happening now, especially with what just happened the other week with the fast food workers around the world and the country, the economic system has caused some of the older generation to go back into the workforce. And that same spirit that they were witnessing when they were young is coming back into the whole situation. And it's nothing, it's pushing us forward. That's what I like to say. And I think it's a good thing. When you do talk about where the movement is going, it has everything to do with cooperation from, people who've been around 40, 50 years, actually talking and interacting with people who've just come in last year.
I want to thank, again, all three of our guests. We wanted to, well, not guests, but our participants in today. Kenyon Beasley with the American Postal Workers Union. Paul McLennan, who's part of our team now here on the WRFG Labor Forum, who gives us our history lesson. And our two guests today, Greg Fann, who is the Metro Atlanta president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and Terence Courtney, often a voice here at WRFG, who is with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. I just want to say that when I became an activist in the union, first by trying to organize a union at a GE plant, the slogan that always kind of motivated me was, if you don't have a union, fight to get one. But if you're in a union, fight to make it fight.
There you go. There you go.
And so I think that is the situation that we have seen here as we were talking about, starting first with General Baker, that very clearly he fought to make the UAW a fighting union, but beyond that he fought to make his community a fighting community, and that meant joining everyone together. And worker solidarity is key, but it's important to recognize that some workers are more oppressed than others. We all can be suffering the same heat, but we don't necessarily suffer the same heat from the boss. All right, with that, WRFG's Labor Forum is going to close out for today. We wish all of you those of you who had an opportunity to have a day off, we hope that you enjoyed it. We know that many, many low-wage workers, in fact, were working today, and we want to express our solidarity with you and that we support your fight for $15 an hour minimum,
Yes.
and the right to a union.
Yes.
That's all for today. Bye-bye.
Keep fighting.
All right. Great work on that.